Hare Krishna, everyone. You're listening to the Namras podcast, the number one Hare Krishna podcast in the world. I'm so honored to have Her Grace Urmila Devi Dasi. Urmila Manchi, thank you so much for joining me here on the podcast for the second time.
Yes.
But this time in person. We're so honored to have you and to speak to you. We can get started with these two books that Mataji's written recently. Recently.
Yes, these are the two most recent books.
We can start here with Career Dharma. This is super interesting because I think it relates to a lot of what devotees have to struggle or deal with in life as far as your career and your, what you say, field of work.
Yes.
Why don't you tell us what was how was the idea of this kind of conceived?
Well, it was something that I talked about in my classes, like usually as a side topic.
Yeah, if you could just talk a little bit closer. Yeah,
it was something that I talked about kind of as a side topic in my classes over the years, and people would come up to me regularly and say, "You've really got to write a book on this." And I was thinking, I don't know. I had published Raghunath Das Goswami's Manashiksha,
yes,
and that was kind of more the direction I wanted to go in. But people kept asking and asking, and I saw this topic as a huge need, both for those who are already practitioners of Krishna consciousness and for the world in general. So then I met my co-author, Dr. Ruchira Datta. Her initiated name is Urmila Devi Dasi. That's not my god sister, Rukmini.
Okay, yes.
She says that she's not the real Rukmini. She's the fake Rukmini.
Mm-hmm.
So, I tell people, Anyway, so I met her, and very quickly I said, hey, I'd like to write a book on this. Would you be willing to help me? And she said, sure. So we went to New Vrindavan for a month, she and I. And I thought, we'd finish the book in a month. It'd be a 40-page booklet kind of thing.
40-page booklet.
That was the idea. Yeah. And I'd say by like day 3, it was obvious that was not how it was going to turn out.
Wow.
That it was really going to be in depth. Dr. Datta really added a tremendous amount of depth. I'd say that she made the book 100 times better than it would have been had just I wrote it. But it was mostly to fulfill a real need. Mm-hmm. A real need, both, as I say, among current practitioners and then the people in general.
Mm-hmm. And that need being that, we spoke about that too right before we started, but that kind of binary of
yes.
Let's talk a little bit about that because that's super interesting to me.
Okay, well, we could talk about it first for people who are already devotees of Krishna. So
yeah.
There's this conception that my spiritual life is over here and that my work and family and other life is over here, and that if I was really a serious person in my spiritual life, I wouldn't do any of that stuff at all.
Yes.
I would live in a temple ashram, or I'd be a traveling preacher, or I'd live at the bank of Radhakund, and I would just chant all the time.
Yeah.
And just read all the time. And it's just because I have so many material desires and I'm so fallen that I have to work in the world and have a family. And that's just terrible. It's so sad. And I should get out of it as soon as possible. I had someone recently say, yeah, you want to take Vanaprastha as early as you can to just get out of jail early. So, it's kind of that concept that somehow work in the world is 10th class.
Yes.
And not seeing that your work can be spiritualized, which when you think of it in terms of Shastra is absurd because the entire Bhagavad Gita is about how to spiritualize your work. The whole Bhagavad Gita is Arjuna says, I want to walk away from my work and become a beggar. And Krishna's like, no, spiritualize it. So there's that side. And if we want to think about the greater society, we're not just trying to have some world-denying, cloistered ashrams. If you look at the 7 purposes of ISKCON, we're trying to create a spiritualized society.
Right.
Well, that means that we need to guide people as to how to take what is their ordinary life and transform it. As Prabhupada writes in the purport to 424, the science of turning matter into spirit. Another way you could look at it for the general population is like, I really, really doubt that very many people in the world wake up in the morning and say, you know, I need to have a regular spiritual practice. And I think I'd like to have one that takes me 3 hours a day. I don't think that that's like a pressing desire on the part of most people.
Yeah.
But if you went to practically anyone in the world, a few exceptions, like, you know, hardened criminals and completely lazy people, but the vast majority of people in the world. And if you say, would you like a way of maintaining yourself that could be the best expression of yourself, that would give you the kind of prosperity that enriches you, that you would joyfully share with others, and where you'd be making a meaningful contribution to the world? How many people would say, wow, that is what I would really like to do? And that's what's given in the Shastra. It's a huge part of our literature. And it's directly connected with spirituality, because you can't do that without having at least a spiritual element in your life. So we see this as the natural Shastric bridge to bhakti. And Srila Prabhupada describes it like that. I was just giving class in Brooklyn, and that was exactly how Prabhupada was describing the 4 spiritual and social orders of life, as the natural bridge to bhakti. Mm-hmm. And if you have bhakti in society, then people are going to be living in that way.
So is this book, the audience is devotees or people who want to spiritualize? Well, is it for devotees or is it for also for?
Well, our target audience was like people 18 to 28 who are looking to start a career and have some at least openness to Eastern thought. Mm-hmm. So we wrote it in language for the general public. We did not write it in Hare Krishna jargon at all, although we use some Sanskrit terms. We don't use English translations for the 6 types of prosperity or for the 3 modes of nature. We use the Sanskrit terms for that. But we wrote it in language for the general public. What we're finding is that devotees are also just absolutely loving it. And what we're also finding, interestingly enough, is by using language for the general public, it's giving devotees kind of a fresh perspective.
Yes.
Because there's things that they may think that they know and they may understand, but their knowledge of it may be distorted.
Yes.
And it may be mixed with a lot of misconceptions. So it's like it's similar to when someone first comes to the Hare Krishna movement and you kind of see the movement through their eyes and you get a fresh perspective on what you're already doing.
Yeah.
So we've seen that with the devotees. And in the classes that I've taught with this around the world, twice we had GBC members in the classes. And they said things like, you know, all the devotees should be trained in this way. This should be a standard part of our devotee training, and our community should be organized this way, and so forth. Although we wrote it for the public.
Yeah. Going back to the keeping the things separate, for me personally, I think that my career allows me to do the things that I'd like to do, which is like Krishna consciousness and whatever, traveling or maintaining my family. What would you say, is that kind of a principle or a part of this, or does it need to be more integrated in your life than just, this is allowing me to do?
More integrated.
Tell us a little bit more about what's like the ideal.
Well, I mean, when Krishna is talking to Arjuna, he's talking about a total 100% integration. Mm. Krishna's not saying to Arjuna, okay, you know, meditate in the morning and rule the kingdom in such a way that you also have time to read the Bhagavatam. That's certainly there. That's important. That's very important. You don't want your work to take over your life. Right. At the same time, he's saying, do your work for me. Yat karoshi, yat agnashi, yat tahosi dadasi, yat tapasyasi kante, yat tat guru shramat arpanam. Everything you do should be an offering to me. That there shouldn't be a distinction. I mean, Prabhupada talks about an iron rod and a fire, which I don't think very many of us in 2024 see blacksmiths as part of our daily life. Right. But we all cook, or we see people who cook, or we're around people who cook. Yeah. So you can think of a metal pot on the fire. The fire is your sadhana, and the metal pot on the fire becomes as hot as the fire. So your family, your work, your home should become so integrated with your bhakti that there really isn't a distinction. You can't really say, Well, my chanting of my japa is my bhakti, and my dealing with the customers in the computer store is my work. It all becomes your bhakti. It all becomes a way of connection. And we have one of the principles of Career Dharma is to have regular ceremonies of connection with the divine. And we have a guest essay in there, not by a devotee, called Every Act is Ceremony. That everything that one does should be a connection with the divine. Everything should be a connection with Krishna at every step. That's the idea. I mean, Prabhupada talks about in the Bhagavad Gita, live life with a thrill at every moment. So that's not, oh, I'm thrilled that my work allows me to travel and do podcasts. But to be thrilled with the work.
Wow. That's difficult.
Well, it's
about how you think about it.
It's only difficult because we haven't understood the formula in a systematic way. You know, Prabhupada gave the first purpose of ISKCON was systematic training in the techniques of spiritual life to correct the imbalances. And what did he say? For real peace and unity in the world. And the term peace and prosperity, Prabhupada used 195 times in his books and lectures. So it's a question of just having a systematic, what Rukmini and I did was spend 6 years to figure out what are the principles of Career Dharma, not what are the details. Details are constantly changing.
Principles, right?
You know, what are the basic principles? What are the things that don't change? What are the things that were as true 10,000 years ago as they are today and will still be true in 10,000 years? A lot of times when people look at this, they're looking at details, which are constantly changing. So what are the basic principles? And, you know, Krishna also says in the Bhagavad Gita that if you do yajna, you'll live happily in this world and then attain liberation. It's interesting, you know, he calls the world Dukhalayam. Chaitanya Charan Prabhu mentioned about in a class, he said, like we say, the Himalayas, and Hima means cold. Himalaya, full of cold. He said, but the Himalayas are not only cold, they're also beautiful. They're also wonderful. They're also incredible.
Yeah.
You know, so this world is actually only miserable if you see it separately from Krishna. There's this incredible statement Srila Prabhupada makes in the Krishna book, pretty sure it's in chapter 20, where he says that the materialists see the world as very aggressive, but to those who are in Krishna consciousness, everything is happily situated. Now, what's terrible is that sometimes when I've quoted this to people, they've said, are you sure you're quoting that right? Didn't you get it backwards? Isn't it the materialists think they're happy and the devotees see that everything is aggressive?
Yeah.
And I said, then why do you want to be a devotee?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So the devotee sees Sarvakalamidam Brahma or Vasudeva Sarvamiti. Krishna is everywhere and everything can be connected with him. I can see everything I'm doing as a service. And everywhere I can feel that I'm Krishna's servant. One just needs to learn the techniques of doing that. And although those are given in Srila Prabhupada's books, he wanted us to present it in a systematic way. So that's really what we've done. We've given people a template. You know, you just, like the first part of the book is just figuring out what is my nature.
Okay, yeah. Because that's important to understand.
Well, that's the first thing to understand.
Yeah.
And a lot of people in 2024 are completely confused about that. People in their 40s and 50s are confused about it.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. Well, I like this, and I'm good at this, and I've tried this, and I've worked at this, and I don't know what my nature is.
Like they could be doing a certain career, but that's not their nature.
Exactly.
Right. I feel like I do. I'm doing that.
Oh, no. Well, we'll have to include a personal consultation.
Yes. I mean, this podcast is something more my nature that I do. But my career, full disclosure, it's very separate from my.
Oh, boy.
I need to work on that for sure.
Well.
That's why this book is very interesting to me.
Well, it's interesting also that generally when people read the book, at least part one, or if they take my seminars on it, then usually people just get it. That's enough.
Yeah.
either attending the seminars or reading at least part one of the book. And then, look, I just taught an overview in 45 minutes in Lloyd's Bank in London to 30 people, not devotees. And afterwards, 3 of them came up to me and said, oh, now I know what I need to do in my career. So generally we're finding that. But some people, then they still need like a personal consultation because they're like, I'm still confused.
Wow.
And now sometimes that only takes 2 minutes, literally. Sometimes a person is like, well, I don't know if I'm in artistry or ideas. And I'm like, well, why do you think you're in artistry? Oh, da, 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 da. Why do you think you're in ideas? Da, da, da. And then they go, oh, I know what I'm supposed to do. And then the longest I've taken is 2.5 hours to try, asking questions and helping people discover for themselves. So the first thing is figuring out your nature and ensuring that what you do for a livelihood matches your nature.
Yes.
And this is a big point of the Bhagavad Gita. Then the second part of the book is, okay, now that you know your nature and you're in the right place, how can you use that in a way that's going to give you purpose and meaning and dharma and satisfaction? Because there are people who are saying, okay, I'm doing the right thing. I know who I am. I love my work, but I don't see how it's spiritual. How can I make it spiritual?
Yes.
So part 2 of the book is how can you connect your work with the spiritual? And you can't do that if you're not doing your own work.
If you're not doing your own work.
If you're not doing the work according to your nature, you can't do it.
Oh, I see. Okay.
It's like if you're a heart muscle, you can't be connected to the good of the body if you're not in the heart. If you're in the lung, you can't ask the question, how can I serve the body? It wouldn't make any sense. We say, first get to the heart where you belong, and then you can talk about serving the body. So first find out what is your nature, be in the right place. Then you can talk about how your work can be service.
How do you find out? So the natures here are artistry, resources, government, and ideas.
Yes. And then we also look at what we call the 6 types of prosperity.
Okay.
Aishvarya, Gyan, Shri, Virya,
yes,
Yasha, and Vairagya, as to how do we define prosperity for ourselves. That people often think of prosperity just in terms of money.
Yes, that's what most people think.
Right. Do you have a successful career means do you make a lot of money? But if you ask anyone, and I've asked thousands of people, do you know of anybody who doesn't have a lot of money but has a rich life? And everybody knows of somebody like that. And then, do you know of anybody who has a lot of money and a poor life? And everybody at least has read about someone like that in the newspapers. Right? These really rich people who are addicted to drugs and go through 5 marriages and they commit suicide. So we all know that there's not a 1-to-1 correlation between how much money you have and whether or not you actually feel that you have a prosperous life. I mean, obviously money is important. People have to have money. You can't buy this microphone without money. I'm sure it was an expensive microphone. So, the cameras probably too. Okay. So, everybody needs money. I can't even get a sari without money. But that's not the sum and substance of whether or not we actually have prosperity. So we look at these 6 types of prosperity and we examine what they mean and which of these are particularly nourishing for us.
One of them?
Usually there's 2 or 3 that's especially important for us, that if we don't have them as part of our work, we're not going to feel satisfied no matter how much money we're making. So both things. The fields are these broad ideas, resources, government, artistry. These are the broad fields of work that Krishna describes in the Bhagavad Gita in the 4th chapter, 18th chapter. And then within those, one can define the specificity of careers by the prosperity types that you feel really nourish you.
Okay. How do you connect the fields with the 6
prosperity types? Well, let's say that you're really nourished by yasha, which means righteous fame. So that would mean that your work involves some sort of very supportive community that's being appreciative, that maybe you work with a team that really appreciates each other, that really supports each other, that isn't just task-focused. Now, some people are going to find that very important in their work. In fact, I know people who can't even be productive unless they have a supportive appreciative team. And I know people that after the pandemic didn't want to keep working remotely. They wanted to go into work and have their team.
Right.
And again, we're not talking about a team that's just task focused, but a team where there's social, emotional support, acknowledgement, appreciation. And then there's other people that really don't want that in their work. They want to do their work by themselves. You know, they can't wait to get home from an awards dinner. And it's just, they want their social connection in the afternoons and the weekends.
Right.
And they want their work to just be work. And then there's other people who are kind of ambivalent about it. So if you know that Yasha is a very important prosperity type for you, then you're going to look at not just your general field, like if you're going to say, okay, I'm in the field of resources, but you're going to look for, well, what specific company, what specific office, what specific work am I going to have that kind of supportive environment? And if it's something you really don't want in your work, then you're going to be looking for, where do I not have to deal with that in the environment? And if we take another one, let's take, which one do you want to take?
Like as far as the fields?
No, the prosperity types.
Oh, prosperity. Beauty.
Okay, Shri. Well, we avoid giving them a one-word English translation.
Okay, right.
Because they're actually quite broad.
Yes.
So Shri, the literal meaning of Shri is kind of sparkly, brilliancy. And Shri can mean visual beauty, auditory beauty,
Oh, right.
olfactory beauty. It could mean even tactile beauty. It can mean beauty of nature. And it can mean charismatic leadership. Like what you're doing with these podcasts involves the Shri of charismatic leadership. So by doing a podcast, that doesn't make you a leader in terms of, that doesn't give you a group of people that you're managing and directing and engaging, but it makes you what they call an influencer.
Right.
So that is Shri in your work. Like if this was your livelihood, which it's not, it's your hobby.
Yes.
But if it was your livelihood, you would be getting the charismatic leadership of Shri from your work. And my guess is that in the podcast, you also must do a lot of like dealing with the audio.
For sure, yeah.
Yeah, and the video.
Yes.
And making sure it's beautiful.
Yes.
So that's another aspect of Shri, probably a little bit more minor one, but to have the beautiful visuals and beautiful audio.
Yes.
So like I know someone who likes to weave and dye textiles, natural fibers with natural dyes. So that's visual beauty and tactile beauty. I know somebody who works with fragrances and essential oils. So that's olfactory beauty, right? And or like I use a lot of Shri in my work in terms of visual beauty. This other book, Krishna Meditations, is full of gorgeous artwork.
Yes.
And in any place, if I live in a place, I like to put beautiful artwork on my wall. And I like to buy it from the artists. I like to support artists in some way. So that's visual Shri in my work. You could also have Shri in your work if you yourself are beautiful. And if being physically beautiful yourself is part of your work. You could have Shri in your work if you work in nature. You're a landscape gardener or you take care of a national park and you're working with the beauty of nature. And again, it could be in any of the four fields. So you could be producing books of wisdom with artwork in it. Or you could be working in the field of government where you're managing a national park. Or you could be in the field of resources where you have a perfume company. Or you could be in the field of artistry where you're making wood carving. So you could, in any of those fields, you might have Shri integrated into your work. And then there are people who don't really want Shri integrated into their work. They find it an annoying frill. They want to be just practical. They might not mind if someone else creates beauty around them, but they don't want to be involved with that in their work. And then there are other people who don't really care one way or another.
So this analysis that you're doing right now, if someone reads this, they will be able to analyze their own.
Yes.
nature.
And we have, in the appendices, we have exercises you can do that should help with that as well.
Wow. That's really interesting. You were talking about that you provide a template for people, and then there's techniques also involved.
Correct.
So could we talk a little bit about the techniques?
Well, we provide their techniques for figuring out your nature and then
Okay.
the techniques for using your nature in a spiritual way.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting.
Okay, so the first one there is going to be that you give in charity. So if you want to spiritualize your career, again, first you've got to have a career that matches your nature.
Yes.
Or you can't even talk about spiritualizing it,
Right.
right? I can't donate your car to the temple. I can only donate my car to the temple. If you say, Urmila, how are you going to spiritualize Namarasa's car? It's like, well, I can't.
Yes.
Right? So first it's got to be yours. And then first thing is to give in charity. To have this mood that I need to share. That whatever I'm getting from my work is the gift of God. It's Lakshmi Devi. And in order to honor Lakshmi Devi, I have to share. And Krishna says in the 18th chapter, even great souls should give in charity. Right? I mean, we talk about charity might be particularly, especially for those who are in the field of resources, because they tend to be the wealthiest. But everyone is supposed to give in charity. I mean, one of the occupations of those in the field of ideas is to give in charity. Right? To
field of
collect
ideas.
charity and to give in charity. Like people they'll often think fundraising is business. I'm like, no, that's in the field of ideas, according to Shastra. So everyone is supposed to give in charity. And we go through, in our chapters on charity, we go through the techniques. How do you deal with the mind saying, well, I don't have enough money. I have to wait till I have enough money. Or saying, well, I'm not sure who I should give to. How do I know it's a worthy charity? How do I know who should I give to? What should I give? So we go through a list of techniques in order to be able to work that out for yourself.
Right.
And then there's also, you don't have to just give money. Whatever prosperity types you're enjoying, you can also give those. If you enjoy Shri, give Shri. Which is like what you're doing. You're enjoying Shri and you're sharing beautiful video and beautiful audio with others. If you enjoy the prosperity of leadership, Aishwarya, if you're an Ishwara, you can volunteer your time as a leader. Do something that's not paid leadership activity. Whatever type of prosperity you're enjoying in your life, you can also share that with others as charity. In fact, one should share that with others. Like Srila Prabhupada told my god sister Yamuna, he said, if you don't teach others what you know about cooking, you'll become envious. And I'm like, what does that mean? And I realized envy is, you can have nice things, but not as nice as me. Like you can have a nice car as long as my car is nicer.
Yeah.
You can have a happy marriage if my marriage is happier. It's like, I don't want anyone to have as much or more than I have. And that's the opposite of spirituality. Sometimes Srila Prabhupada would define spirituality as I'm happy at the happiness of others. And he would define materialism as I'm unhappy at the happiness of others. And I'm happy at the unhappiness of others. Sometimes he would say that's the demarcation line. And so charity is, by definition, I'm finding my happiness at making others happy.
Yeah.
It's an intrinsically spiritual thing to give to others, to share.
When we think of it in normal terms, it just usually, the basic is just you're giving money to someone, but there's so much more than that. What
You
you're
can
saying.
give your time.
Yeah.
You can give your knowledge. You can share beauty.
Yeah.
You can share health. You can share renunciation. You can share leadership. There's so much you can share besides just money. I mean, we should also share some money, for sure. That's important. But money isn't the only definition of wealth. So that's the first technique. And then we also talk about charity in what we call the three gunas, the shades of ego.
Shades of ego.
The shades of ego, yes. And we don't have one word translations for them, so we just use the words tamas, rajas, and sattva. And of course, there's charity in sattva and charity in rajas and charity in tamas. So we explain that's also part of the technique, to make sure you're giving charity at least in sattva, and preferably charity above the shades of ego. Preferably you're giving charity in transcendence,
Right.
which means you're giving the right thing to the right people,
With
for the right
mood.
reasons,
Right.
with respect, at the right time, to please the Supreme, to please Krishna. Okay, so what's another technique? So another technique is that your work should be honest. So that means that you should be representing your goods or services accurately, charging a fair price. If you are paying employees, you should be paying them a fair price.
Yeah.
Right? So representing what you're doing accurately, charging a fair price, paying people a fair price. It should be honest, fair, and accurate. And we discuss how to do that, how to make sure that your work is honest. And we discuss, again, techniques of making sure work is honest. And then making sure that your work is actually of value. Because you could be in the right place and giving charity and having honest work, and you're producing something that nobody needs. Mm-hmm. Right? A lot of what people produce today, everybody could just do fine without it.
Yeah.
In fact, a lot of what's produced, not only could people do fine without it, but it's a burden.
Probably be better without it.
You would probably do better without it. So it should be something that's of real value.
Yeah.
Right? And not useless and not harmful. Right? That was your and I discussion about work 22 years ago.
Yes.
Not doing work that's harmful.
Yes.
So, alcohol industry, tobacco industry, pornography, slaughterhouse industry, not doing work that's harmful. Now, to avoid any harm to anybody, anywhere along the line is probably impossible.
Yeah.
I assume that everyone watching this, you must be watching it on a device that has a lithium battery. And we know for lithium batteries, there's often exploitation of children in Africa to mine the rare. I don't think you can totally, absolutely eliminate all harm.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean you should be running a tobacco factory. So just because we're in Kali Yuga, and I mean, not even Kali Yuga. Krishna says every action is covered by some kind of fault as smoke covers fire. So there's going to be some fault. But our work should be as far as is humanly possible, free from fault and of real value. So that's also a technique. How do you figure that out? How do you make sure that your work is of real value? And then we have a really cool chapter, esoteric work of value. So if all you're doing is just honest work of value, then you're still within the realm of karma. But if I'm doing my work as Krishna's servant, and I'm using my work as a vehicle to give people somehow or other, in some way, to communicate love of God.
Oh.
Now, that doesn't mean I have to give people books or prasadam. Right, in chapter 12, text 13 through 20 in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna talks about what's dear to him. He said, one who is a kind friend to all living entities is dear to me. If you're just a kind friend to everyone at work to please Krishna, and if you desire, Srila Rupa Goswami talks about the devotees can give Krishna consciousness to others by their good wishes. If you just desire that the people, your colleagues, your customers, whatever, your vendors, your clients, if you just desire that they have spirituality, you're acting, according to Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur and Madhura Kadambini, you're acting as a conduit for Krishna's mercy.
Wow.
Which gives people value that's beyond karma, beyond what they've paid for. So that's a technique, how to do that. Now, the next technique is one of the most crucial. If we want to look at what's wrong with society through this lens of Career Dharma, one of the things that's wrong is that people are doing work that's not theirs. We've got heart muscles in the lung and lung cells in the brain and brain cells in the stomach, and it's a mess. And we have 2 chapters that go through how much harm that causes society. You basically can't do ethical work if you're doing someone else's work. Your work is intrinsically adharmic if you're doing work that's not your nature.
Wow.
It's intrinsically adharmic. Because you're going to bring your natural dharma into a place where your natural dharma becomes adharma.
Explain that for me.
Okay, so if you're naturally in the field of ideas, you're going to be very merciful and forgiving. But here you are working in the field of government, where you're going to be soft on crime.
Oh, yeah.
You won't be able to act in the field of government.
Oh, right.
All right? Or another example, like in the field of government, you're energized by crisis. Think about a firefighter. Everyone runs out of the fire. You run in. Now, people who have the temperament, who belong in the field of government, they try to keep things without crisis. They try to keep things peaceful. They try to avoid crisis. But when a crisis comes unsought, they're happy. Yes, there's a verse in the Bhagavad Gita like that. They're energized by crisis.
Right, the warriors.
Yes, but not just the warriors. Anyone who's in the field of government. The social workers, the judges, the politicians, the firefighters.
Right.
Their purpose is to keep peace in society. Their purpose is to keep crisis from happening. But when it happens, they're energized by it. They become focused. Now, let's say you're naturally in the field of artistry. The field of artistry is a field where you like security. It's where you're naturally a very satisfied person. If you have a nice place to live and a loving life partner and good food to eat, and you can really you're fairly compensated and respected for the quality and integrity of your craft, your customers and clients are happy with you, you're happy. You don't like crisis. So if you naturally have the temperament of the field of artistry and you're working in government, then when the shooting starts, you don't go into the school. Remember that happened, right?
Mm.
Why did you go into the school? Oh, there were people shooting guns in there. That means they didn't have the temperament of the field of government. They probably had the temperament of the field of artistry.
Right.
And so you're naturally a dharmic. You can't do that dharma. You know, in Russia, when the government took over the farms, there was famine. Because people with the temperament of government, they don't have a profit-minded mentality. And so the food was rotting in the fields. People starved. People with the field of government, if they try to do work in the field of resources, they ruin it.
Yeah.
So their natural dharma becomes adharma when it goes in the wrong place. So ethical work, by definition, has to include your being in the right place. And that's one of the big problems in modern society. But another big problem is people are in the right place, but they haven't been trained how to value the natural dharma of their place. Maybe they have the inclination to protect and to rule, but they haven't been trained in the dharma of the field of government. Or maybe they have the inclination for research and study and teaching, but they haven't been trained in the dharma of the field of ideas.
When you mean the dharma of that specific field of idea, what do you mean?
Well, each field has its particular type of integrity.
Okay.
If you can think about an ecosystem. So our oldest son has a place on the big island of Hawaii. And they say I think I'm getting these numbers right, of the 32 different climactic regions on the planet, the big island has 30 of them.
Right.
So, you know, as you're driving over like the Saddle Road, every 10 minutes you're in a different climactic region.
Yes, I remember.
Yes. And in order to take care of those, there's different care that's needed. Like you need to give a different kind of care in each of those regions if you were going to take care of the plants and the animals there. It's a different sort of environment.
Okay.
So each field of work has its particular dharma that needs to be nourished.
Okay.
Right? So like the integrity of the field of ideas is this concept that you will sacrifice everything, including your life, for objective truth. Think about journalists who will be imprisoned rather than reveal their sources.
Right.
Or journalists who go to war zones where they're risking their life in order to speak the truth to power. Yes? People preaching religious doctrines in a place where they're going to get tortured and persecuted and killed. And you have to keep that integrity of the field. Another way of keeping the integrity of the field, like in the field of ideas, is ensuring that you're not going to be financially beholden to people in such a way that's going to skew your objectivity.
Yeah.
You know, if the pharmaceutical company is paying you to research their pharmaceuticals, that's a pollution of the field. It's a pollution of the dharma of the field. You know, in journal articles, they always have to list, do I have any conflict of interests? If we're going to talk about the dharma of the field of government, so that means that you learn to put people first, be willing to sacrifice everything to save others and protect others, running into the fire. We think of traditionally, the king rode at the head of the army. How many countries would declare war if the president or prime minister had to ride at the front of the army?
Yeah.
They think 5 times about it, 10 times about it. Am I willing to risk my life for this battle? And in the field of government, if there's a need in the country, you empty the treasury. And we have so many examples in the Bhagavatam like that. And you can give away all your personal property for the good of the people. You know, special interests. There's equal justice for everyone. So that's maintaining the integrity of the field of government. If we're going to look at the field of resources, so in the field of resources, that you actually care for the resources. You care for the land, you care for the water, the air, the animals. You're getting wealth from that you're giving to society, but then you care for them. You don't pollute them, you don't kill them, you don't torture them, you actually care for them.
Right.
I was talking about this once in Italy, and one gentleman in the audience started crying. And he was saying, you know, this meat restaurant has been in my family for generations. But obviously we're not caring for the animals. Then in the field of resources, people in that field are the primary employers of society. So to take care of your employees, to make sure that your practices are ethical and fair, and to be willing to sacrifice for that. In the field of artistry, you maintain the integrity of artistry by being willing to sacrifice for the quality and the integrity of your goods and services, even if you're being pressured to make more money or work faster. Right. If someone's going to say, okay, well, you know, you could sell 10 times more chairs, 10 times faster if you cut down the quality. And you go, no, this is my craft.
That's an artist, yeah.
Yeah, that's someone in the field of artistry. Or I remember seeing a sign in a restaurant window that said, you know, we make our food slowly. If you want fast food, go down the street.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, respecting the customer. So this, and then cherishing the integrity of your prosperity type. Because seeing whatever prosperity you're enjoying is Lakshmi Devi. It's God's wife. It's coming from Mother Earth. And therefore, I don't just, you know, in our Hare Krishna lingo, I don't just enjoy boga, I enjoy prasadam.
Right.
So whatever prosperity I'm enjoying, I cherish it. Right? Let's say I'm enjoying Aishwarya, I'm a leader. I cherish that by helping other people feel smart and competent, not overlording them, as an example. Right? Mm-hmm. If I'm enjoying gyan, if I'm enjoying knowledge, then I make sure I have some emotional intelligence. I respect others who have other kinds of expertise. So we detail these sort of techniques.
Yeah.
And then the other 2 individual techniques of spiritualizing is one that should be obvious, that we do some sort of spiritual practice regularly, separate from our work.
Right.
That we have some time, Prabhupada would say you have to pay your electric bill to the sun. You know, that we have some time we're giving back to the source of our talents, the source of our body, the source of everything that we have, that we're giving back. That we have some ceremony of connection, which is our general term of defining the word yajna.
I love that. Ceremony of connection.
It's a ceremony of connection.
Wow.
And to come, as I was saying earlier, that every act should eventually become a ceremony. But at least take time off, at least once a week, preferably at least once a day. Yeah. That I'm going to have some time set aside to connect with the Supreme, to connect with Krishna, to connect with the divine.
Yeah.
And eventually that should become integrated. And then the final individual technique is to work above the shades of ego. And I've had people tell me, well, that's very advanced. And I'll say, well, I don't know. Krishna says this in the 2nd chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. So the Bhagavad Gita is our basic text. Prabhupada saying it's our ABC text. 2nd chapter, we're not really far into the Bhagavad Gita. Nishtraigunya Bhavarjuna. Do your work above the modes. Do your work above the shades of ego. Do your work in transcendence. And we go through techniques of that. How can you understand? How can you gradually come to a higher shade? And how can you come to transcendence? So those are the basic techniques. Then we also have techniques for society in general. But we're just looking right now at techniques for the individual to spiritualize their own work.
Yeah. A big topic these days is specifically doing like spiritual activities for money, like whether it be kirtan or speaking.
Ooh,
or
so you
things
really want to dive deep into controversy.
No, it's not.
That's your middle name, right?
It's not about that. It's more.
Nama controversy rasa. The rasa of controversy.
But that interests me because in the context of
That's
this,
very important.
yeah,
It's very important. I mean, I know of one who shall remain nameless leader. When I discussed this, he said to me, well, if you're a musician by trade, you should sing mundane songs Monday through Friday for money, and then on the weekend do kirtan for free.
right.
And I said, what kind of an ideal society are you envisioning? So if Krishna consciousness took over the world, would everybody just be singing mundane songs? So let's look at music. All right, let's look at kirtan specifically in music.
Sure.
All right. Okay, so we have three options there. One is you're in the field of artistry. You're a musician. And that's your livelihood as a musician. You get paid for doing music. And you have shows and you charge tickets, and the tickets have a certain amount of money that people pay, and there's a set price, or you have, a venue you go to and you say, this is how much I get paid for appearing at that. That's what you do. You're a musician and you charge a set fee. If you were a plumber in the field of artistry, you would do the same kind of thing. Right. And you're a devotee. So you want your music to be about Krishna, like George Harrison.
Yeah.
And Srila Prabhupada was very pleased with George Harrison. And he didn't say, well, George Harrison should stop charging money for his record albums.
Yeah.
Someone who's in the field of artistry, they are maintained by their artistry. They have to be paid for it. And they're singing songs about Krishna. That's what we want them to do. If every musician in the world sang songs related to Krishna, if just that happened, if you just woke up tomorrow morning and every professional musician, what's her name, Taylor Swift, if she started, imagine.
That would be amazing.
Imagine that.
Yeah.
Isn't she like the most popular? Doesn't she have like the most awards of any musician ever?
Insanely famous and popular.
30-something awards, I don't know.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm not really up on all these things, but
me neither.
Like let's just say that her and the other big famous musicians, whoever they are, let's say that tomorrow morning, that was the only thing that changed in the world. Every single musician started integrating spirituality and Krishna consciousness into their music.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that have a huge ripple effect in the world?
Change the world.
It would change the world. Just think of how much George Harrison changed the world. I mean, my joining the Hare Krishna movement was due in large part to George Harrison and the Radha Krishna Temple album that he produced, and then later My Sweet Lord.
Wow.
And I'm not the only one. Okay. Now then there are certain people who are in the field of ideas that are going to use music as their way of communicating wisdom.
Right.
They're not professional musicians. They're wisdom workers. And they can give wisdom through language, through mathematics, but they might also give wisdom through music. Now, the way people in the field of ideas are supposed to be maintained is they're not supposed to charge a set amount of money for things like people in the field of artistry. Oh. But people are supposed to give them money. And society should be trained to give charity to people in the field of ideas.
Yes.
Now, in 2024, that doesn't always work.
Because you don't have that culture.
We don't have that culture. So, like we ran a school for years. And at first we tried to be very liberal about people paying tuition.
Really?
And gradually we became stricter and stricter and stricter and stricter.
Yeah.
Because you can't go to the bank and say, can I pay my $1,000 mortgage with a bag of basmati? It just doesn't work.
Yes.
So in 2024, even people who are working in the field of ideas may have to set a price.
Yeah.
Just like astrology is in the field of ideas. But you go to most astrologers, they're going to tell you they have their prices listed because they know that if they just said, please give a donation, it's kind of like, before Srila Prabhupada, in the Gaudiya Sampradaya, there weren't vows at Diksha. Like the rest of the Gaudiya Sampradaya, nobody takes vows at Diksha. We're the only ones.
Yeah, yeah.
And branches that came from ISKCON. And it was like you said a vow for your japa. But let's say Prabhupada had done that. Let's say Prabhupada had said, okay, each of you set your own vow for japa. Like, what would have happened? We all know exactly what would have happened.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to do one round a day, But he made it, 16 minimum as a vow for everybody. Because he knew he was dealing with people outside of the culture. So because we don't have a culture in the world that you have to support ideas people with charity, therefore even ideas people are sometimes obligated at this point in history to say, okay, if I'm going to do this as my livelihood, I have to have some fee. Although generally you're going to find that they're going to charge less than artistry people because their mood is different. They're not so interested in external things.
Yeah.
But ideally, ideas people doing kirtan should be given in charity. Krishna says, yajna without remuneration to the priests is in the mode of ignorance. So if you've got a person who's doing kirtan, and that's their life, that's what they do, and you don't give them some dakshin, you're now doing bhakti in tamagun. Then we have a third category. We have a category of people that kirtan is not their livelihood at all. It's just not their livelihood at all. They do something else. They're a software engineer, they're whatever. They're a banker, and they're doing kirtan as part of it's their sadhana. Then there's no question of any kind of monetary donation, anything. Because it's their sadhana. They're doing it as a sadhana. That's a different category. Now, if we want a Krishna conscious society, we need to compensate people for doing Krishna conscious activities. Then we might think about where Prabhupada said, don't hear from professionals. Professional Bhagavatam reciters, professional Kirtan reciters. So what does that mean? We hear that and we think, oh, that means I'm paying them. And Prabhupada talked about not paying devotees, but he was talking about not paying devotees who were living in the temple and who were being given everything in kind. So what I see a professional reciter is, so some years ago I read about this Christian preacher who'd become an atheist, but he was still preaching Christianity because that's how he maintained himself.
Wow. Oh, interesting.
And he was writing his own story. And he said, for quite some time, I was still a Christian preacher, although I'd become an atheist. But I felt very conflicted about it. At one point, he said, my wife said to me, well, if you can be a professional Christian, you could be a professional atheist. He said, so then I changed and started teaching atheism for money.
Oh my God.
We're not meant to hear kirtan or shastra from people who are not bhaktas.
Yeah.
Where it's just their job. Like Prabhupada talked about, they, oh, Krishna, where's my cigarette? That would be the example that he would be giving. I'm coming and I'm singing and I'm talking, but I don't have any interest. And I saw in one temple, which don't ask me where, please, where I saw that devotees who were being paid a salary for working at the temple, you didn't see them in the morning program. They showed up at 9 to do their work and they got paid and then they went home.
Yeah.
It was just their job.
Yes.
We want to make sure that it's not that it's our job that we're being paid for. So we don't want to hear from professionals in that way. That's what it means. We want to hear from people who are actually bhaktas. If your nature is in the field of artistry and you are a bhakta, then you're a musician by trade and you should be paid for your trade. And you should give that trade to Krishna. You should do your work for Krishna. Basic philosophy. If you're in the field of ideas and you're communicating through music, you should be compensated through charity. But either way, such people should be compensated. And that's the way it should work, ideally.
Yeah. Yes, I think that what I'm getting from what you're saying is that it's, from the outside, it might look like very simple and black and white, but it's more about like what the person's doing it for. Like it could be in artistry or
Yes. First of all, is it your livelihood or is it a sadhana?
Yeah.
That's the first question. If it's your livelihood, you're supposed to spiritualize your livelihood. And if it's your livelihood, is what you have to get paid for.
Right.
Then are you getting paid for it with a set fee, or are you getting paid for it in random charity? Depends in which field you're in.
What was the second one? Are
you getting paid for it with a set fee or with random charity?
Right. Yes. And
this is true across the board. Like let's say you have somebody who, they're a bank teller or they're a cardiologist, and they come and do some puja at the temple for the deities. They do some deity service at the temple as their sadhana, as their voluntary service. Maybe they come in one morning a week, or they come in on the weekend, or they dress the deities at night after work. It's not their livelihood. But one of the shastric livelihoods for someone in the field of ideas is taking care of the deities. That's one of the livelihoods. One of the 6 livelihoods for someone in the field of ideas given in the Shastra is teaching scripture. And I've heard people say, well, you shouldn't be paid. But it's like, but it says it's one of the livelihoods. Mm-hmm. So if someone's a full-time pujari, if that's what they're doing as their work, and they have a family, then they have to be maintained. Now, they should be maintained through charity. But again, that doesn't always operate. What should happen, what people think is they're thinking, well, I'm giving a donation to the temple, and then the temple is going to compensate the full-time pujaris and full-time cooks, full-time temple workers. They're going to compensate them. So people aren't separately giving a donation to the pujari, for example, if they're a full-time pujari. But they have to be maintained in some way. Now, again, we're looking at 2024, and if we're looking at a non-tropical climate, you're going to have fixed expenses. You can't just go somewhere in the forest and build a hut out of straw. And, it's just not going to work. So therefore, if you don't have some kind of fixed income, you won't be able to pay your fixed expenses, and you'll be in so much anxiety that you can't do your service. So, those are details. And if we can't adjust those details, we can't function in 2024. But to get the principle that especially people in the field of ideas should not be financially beholden to somebody, and that people shouldn't be doing service for the Lord as a job that's not devotion. They shouldn't be doing it just as a job. So those are the principles.
Yeah. I've seen that when people become brahmacharis or they live in the ashram for a long time.
Are you going to more controversy here? It wasn't enough with the other controversy. It's just jumping into the deep end. Okay, here we go.
They live in the ashram, and then when they leave the ashram, they might be a bit older, and they kind of want to do something that's similar to what they were doing in the ashram, as far as like, I see a lot of devotees doing like, who leave the brahmacharya ashram, they become like life coaches or something like that. Mm-hmm. And I think that like, what happened to people leaving the ashram and having a job that's more to like a member of society, like a plumber or something, but people don't connect those, like they separate them, and they're not meant to in what you're saying.
Yes.
Like they feel they need to do something that has something directly associating with Krishna consciousness, like life coaching, or you can talk to someone about Krishna or spirituality, but something like a plumber or something, some trade.
We have a testimony in our book.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah. So the trade is not connected with Krishna as much.
Yes. Well, Srila Prabhupada writes in the 2nd canto that the brahmacharya ashram is for training in the higher values of life, along with specific training for a livelihood. So the traditional brahmachari ashram,
Oh, wow.
first of all, it was for children and teenagers.
Yes.
And just like schools, any school in the world, it trains you how to be a good person. It trains you basic skills like reading and writing and mathematics, and you get specific training for a livelihood. That is the idea of education, right?
Yeah.
You get a degree in a certain thing. And so the traditional Vedic Gurukul wasn't any different from that. There were a series of lectures Srila Prabhupada gave in Mumbai in 1976, where he was talking about the verses from the 7th canto about the Brahmachari ashram. And he was going back and forth in that class between talking about children in a Gurukula and the adult males in the Brahmachari ashram. This would apply to some extent to females in a Brahmacharini ashram as well.
Sure.
But he was conflating those. So really what should be happening is people who move into a Brahmachari ashram should be getting training in Krishna consciousness and working for the mission. But then at some point, I would say 2 years max. Max. At some point, there should be some discussion. Do you think that you're going to get married? Or do you think you want to move on and become a vanaprastha or sannyasi?
Right.
The Brahmachari ashram is really just for children and teenagers. It's a school. There's a few people, very, very few, who remain perpetual students. I mean, even out in the world, there's people who just they collect masters and PhDs, Or they're perpetual seekers. They never have a career. They never work in the world. They don't usually get a family. Some of them are nomadic. They're kind of outside of careers.
Oh, okay.
So we have some people like that. You find in most temples, there's one or two people where they never really became like a preacher. They never became like a vanaprastha or sannyasi, but they didn't marry, and they just stay a simple servant in the temple. There's usually one or two people like that in each temple.
Yes.
And they often fix things, or in some cases, they just help with the pujari service, or they're doing some simple thing. But that's a tiny, 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 tiny minority. So most people are going to go in one of two directions. Either they're going to get married and have a family, or they're going to take some major responsibility in the movement. They're going to take as much preaching responsibility or managerial responsibility as the householder's taking, but they're going to do it as a renunciate. So effectively, they're going to become, from my understanding of the 7th canto, they're going to become a vanaprastha. They're going to move from the brahmachari ashram directly to the vanaprastha ashram. They're going to skip the grihastha ashram. Mm-hmm. But they certainly don't stay in the brahmachari ashram.
Yeah.
Like they're not being called to meals, and they're not a menial, Gauranga Prabhu's not. I mean, he's vanaprastha. He's not like doing some menial,
right?
Right? Like in the brahmachari ashram.
Yeah.
And so we should be giving people this training. First general devotional training. And then you have this split where, okay, are you going to go into the grihastha training program or the vanaprastha training program? And in the grihastha training program, we train people about relationships, how you're going to have a relationship with your spouse, with your children, and what's going to be your ideal career. And we're training them for their career. Isn't that what Varnashram training is supposed to be? I don't know why this is radical. Why is this a controversial, radical thing? Yeah. But it is. It is. And when I've gone to heads of brahmachari ashrams and proposed this, like people shouldn't go for more than 1 or 2 years, especially if they're already in their late 20s or 30s, which should probably be 4 to 6 months.
Yes.
And then we train them so that when they leave the ashram, boom, they can go right into their career. We help them find a suitable spouse. We give them premarital counseling, give them parenting training, everything. They can go right in the world as a Krishna conscious person. Or they go right into the world with some independent preaching program that they've got to financially maintain. Yeah. And they've got to develop. They take responsibility. We push them to be adults. Oh my God.
I think it's controversial because then that leader loses that
cheap labor.
Essentially, yeah.
Yeah. But now just think about it. If there was a brahmacharini ashram that did this,
it could be a community around it.
Would they have any lack of people wanting to be in the ashram?
No.
People in those ashrams are transient anyway.
Yeah, yeah.
And when they leave now, under the system in most temples, they leave without any mooring.
Yeah.
And then they often feel that ISKCON let them down. Often they feel that they were pushed out.
Yes.
And then instead of, like I asked the temple president in one temple, I said, if anyone who'd stayed in the ashram for 6 months gave, $5 a month as donation to the temple for the rest of their life, would you have any financial difficulty? He said, no way.
Wow.
So if we're pushing people out way past the time they should have gone out, and we have got to kind of push them out, and then when they go out, they have to move in with their parents because they have no place, they don't have anything established, and then they have to start going to school and they have to start learning stuff.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I don't know if I should say this, but at one point I said to one ISKCON leader, suppose I were to go out in the world and get a job. And the leader said to me, well, what would you put on your resume? And I was like, do you really think all the work I've done in the movement has no value? That I couldn't list it as anything?
All right.
I actually got into my Master's of Education program based on the work I'd done in the Hare Krishna movement.
Right.
So I thought how interesting that the people outside the movement saw my work in the Hare Krishna movement as valuable, and the people inside the movement didn't. But yeah, so we're doing the opposite. So people leave bitter, lost, and then they feel, I already gave everything to the movement. Why should I give anything else?
Yeah.
So if we did it the other way, and then people were like an alumni that wanted to support the place that trained them, and they would support it with money, they'd support it with voluntary service, and that really people would be lining up and saying, I really want this, and we could even charge for it. Have it as a college. I think Prabhupada talked about that. Yes, he did. So,
yeah,
we could actually have a college where people paid to get training in bhakti and get training in their occupation and get training in their life and be able to go and spiritualize the world. And then we could have a devotee president and a devotee mayor and a devotee running Walmart and a devotee running Monsanto and, everything.
Yeah. Could we talk a bit about this case, one of the case studies? The plumbing one is interesting because I don't want to read it right now, but I want you to kind of talk about that if we could.
Well, we have 2 case studies from each of the 4 fields.
Yeah.
One man, one woman. That plumber's a woman. And
cool.
Yeah, her husband's a truck driver.
Okay.
And she's sec initiated. And she talks a lot about how she feels that in her plumbing service that she's able to bring spirituality to the people that she serves.
Uh-huh. Okay.
You were talking about being a life coach. So she says many times when she would repair people's heating systems and boilers, that they would also want to talk to her about what was going on in their life.
Right.
And that she would often use that as an opportunity to try to give them some sort of spiritual guidance and some sort of spiritual help. But she also said that she saw it as service to Krishna, to help people be warm in the winter and have hot water, that Krishna was pleased that she was providing this service to other persons. Again, that Krishna says, one who is a kind friend, one who is not envious, but is a kind friend to all living entities, is very dear to me. Mm-hmm. And Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur talks about Jiva Doya. So she saw my work as a way of being merciful to living entities. Mm-hmm. And in this way, I'm pleased. But I'm being merciful to living entities, not so I can think, I'm such a good person, like in Rajagun. Or not merciful to living entities that think, I'm so spiritual, like in Sattvagun. Not for my own enjoyment and my own material identity, but I'm serving others and being kind to them because that makes Krishna happy.
Mm-hmm. So from the outside, it's not like you can tell someone is doing their career dharma, but it's more about someone's
You could tell
mindset.
Something from the outside.
You could.
Sure. It's just, you definitely could tell something from the outside. You could tell something from the person's demeanor and happiness, like Indradyumna Swami once told a story of how he was in Western type clothes going through an immigration or security line, and one of the other persons in the line said, "You look way too happy, it's going to be suspicious." Most people aren't that happy.
Right.
So, when I was, as part of my PhD, I had a job as a vice principal, like assistant head teacher in a government school.
Oh.
And I was really undercover in terms of being a Hare Krishna devotee because it was in the Bible Belt.
Okay.
And, they couldn't openly fire me for religious reasons, but I didn't want them to try to find some fault in me. So I really kept that under wraps. I mean, the other vice principal who worked in the office knew that because she was also in the same master's and doctoral program that I was in. But no, she was a devout Christian. Thank you, Krishna. That was very cool. But as far as everyone else, I mean, they knew I was a vegetarian. That was like it, right?
Yeah.
But I remember people saying things to me. I remember one parent volunteer who was there a lot, and she said, "What is it about your eyes?" She said, "You just have this glow about you. What is it about you?" And I think it is discernible. It should be discernible.
Okay.
It may not be something that people can put their finger on.
Yeah.
They may not just be able to look at you and say, "Oh, you're a member of the Hare Krishna temple down the road." It might not be obvious in that respect. But people wouldn't, just like Srila Prabhupada talks about himself and how when he was running a pharmacy, that people knew, oh, this is a religious, godly person. This is a person who's spiritual. This is a person who's dedicated to God. Now, I would guess that Prabhupada didn't preach to every single customer that walked into the shop.
Yeah.
I don't think Bhaktivinoda Thakur in every one of his court decisions said, "Okay, 3 years in prison and chant Hare Krishna." That's I don't think so. But people also knew him. He had a reputation as being a religious person.
Yeah.
Yes.
Do you think you would have done that, keeping that under wraps differently now? Or would you have done it it was a circumstantial thing
I think the circumstances were such that there was, it was a job that was for getting my degree.
Yes.
And the way that worked is the school didn't exactly hire me, but the state said, okay, we have these doctoral students and master's students who have to get this work experience as part of their degree, and then they place you in a school.
Yeah.
And so the school can easily say, this person isn't working out. They wouldn't have to go through the normal firing routine.
Yeah.
So I felt that it was a very sensitive situation. And I mean, it's kind of funny. I had intentionally chosen a school that was a short commute, not thinking that by doing that, I no longer would feel comfortable to go grocery shopping in a sari and tilak. That if I had chosen a school that was further away, it would have been. I didn't think of that. By the end of my time there, I actually had some more weeks of work there after I got my degree. It had already gotten in the newspaper because our youngest son, Keshava, got his bachelor's at the same time I got my simultaneous master's and PhD.
Oh,
and
right.
so that was a big newspaper article. And so it was in the article about how he'd gone to the Hare Krishna school and how we were members of the Hare Krishna movement. So that came out about 2 or 3 weeks before the end of the job. So at that point, everybody knew. But at that point, I already had my degree. And it was a done deal. But yeah, in that particular circumstance, I mean, one thing it did teach me, I didn't get the degree in order to work. I mean, by that time, I was already in the Vanaprastha order, and I was doing it as part of my preaching and as part of my service.
Right.
So I wasn't planning on getting any kind of a job from that. But one thing I did learn from that is that if I did get a job, that I needed a job where I didn't have to be undercover as a devotee, for me personally.
Yes.
And I felt that was true for me personally because by the time I had that work experience, I'd been working in the Hare Krishna movement for decades. Openly doing Gurukul work or other work where I was openly a devotee. And it was too much for me. It was just I found it exhausting. I thought, but if from the beginning of my spiritual life, I had been trained to work in the world as a devotee, I don't think I would have found it so wearing. But I mean, I have talked to people in the course of teaching Career Dharma. I remember in Germany, talked to one woman lawyer who said if anyone found out that she was a devotee, they'd find some excuse to fire her.
Right.
And that she really had to be careful how she presented her spirituality at work.
Yeah.
But anyway, that was my conclusion for myself. And that's just for myself, that I would have wanted a job where I could be open. I know one devotee in Dubai, which is, of course, a Muslim country, but there's a lot of Hindus in Dubai. And he said that one thing about the Muslims where he works is when he says to them, I need to take a break at noon to do my prayer, that because they have their 5 times a day prayer, they're very respectful of that. And they can say, they can understand that. But I don't think that every devotee needs to be in that kind of a situation. But that was my takeaway for myself.
Yeah, I would think that when someone has to be so undercover, like you're talking about that lawyer, that could affect their. I mean, I'm not in that same situation, so I don't know. But I would think that it would affect like everything about their how their career.
It's hard.
It's hard. Yeah.
I mean, it was interesting because one day at university, one of the homosexual students was talking about identity.
Yes.
And how that, he had to do identity management so that people wouldn't know that he was gay.
Wow.
And when he said that, I'm like, oh my God, that's what I'm doing. I'm doing identity management. I thought I have to be a devotee without showing that I'm a devotee. And I have to act like a non-devotee without internalizing being a non-devotee. I mean, there were times that it was very challenging.
Sure.
I'm thinking about a few instances. Once where one teacher was wearing this unusual hat. And I said, oh, that's an unusual hat. And she said, it's made of turkey feathers from my son who goes turkey hunting.
Oh my God.
And I thought, okay, what do I say now that would be, proper etiquette, normal Western etiquette in a Western government-funded school, but would also be true to my inner values? I don't remember what I said, but I remember feeling so conflicted, like, how do I deal with this? Another 2 times, one just walking in, I would do what they call management by walking around. So I would walk in each classroom every day. And I remember once walking into a classroom where the teacher was saying, so who are you? You are your curly hair. You are your straight hair. You are your green eyes. You are your brown eyes. You are your freckles. And just, again, I didn't say anything, but I was thinking, whoa, what kind of propaganda are they making for these kids? And I just couldn't say anything.
Yeah.
And I wanted to say something. I wanted to go, no,
you're not any of these things.
Not the body.
Yes,
right?
yes.
I think one of the craziest situations I ended up in, so they had an advanced math class. So it was kindergarten through 5th grade. But the 5th graders who were doing advanced math, the gifted 5th graders, so they had a pull-out class where they were doing like 6th, 7th, or 8th grade math. And the teacher who taught that had a 3-week something in Japan that he went to. And so the principal asked me if I could take over that class. All right. So I'm teaching mathematics to these gifted kids. And we got into adding and subtracting fractions with unlike denominators and having to find this denominators, right? So I was trying to give some examples, and I said, you can't add apples and oranges unless you call them both fruits. You can't add cars and buses unless you call them both vehicles. You have to find a common denominator. And they started coming up with all different examples, right? And then one of them said, are there any 2 things which are so unlike that you can't find a common denominator between them? And without thinking, I just said, well, cars and people. And then I thought, oh no. Here I'm in a government, I'm in a public school where you can't preach religion, and I'm totally undercover as a devotee, and I just try to talk about the difference between matter and spirit. I just, without thinking, I've been a devotee too long. Kind of, and I've been a preacher for too long. And so the kids looked at me. So remember, I was the vice principal. right? I wear a business suit every day. I mean, I wasn't just a teacher. So I was a teacher. I was a vice principal. I was definitely an authority.
Yeah.
So they figured I knew what I was talking about, right? They didn't question me, but they got this funny look on their face. And they said, well, no, you can say they're both the same because they're both matter. They're both made up of atoms. People and cars are both made up of atoms. They're both matter. And I thought, well, I went this far. I'm going to just keep going.
Oh my God.
But I had some trepidation. I didn't get into any trouble, but I thought, am I going to get in trouble? And I said, no. I said, a living being is intrinsically different.
Right.
You know? And these were gifted 12-year-olds. And I could see from all their faces that this had never occurred to them.
Wow.
Ever. The concept that life was inherently different from matter. It just, as my granddaughter would say, it was a mind blow.
Yeah.
You know, they were gobsmacked.
Yeah.
So those were the 3 times when it was a little awkward that I was undercover.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Is there, some people say that when you're young, you don't really know what your nature is per se. So is there a certain age where this is like not applicable?
Well, the empirical research shows that by the time you're 13, your nature can be understood.
By the time you're 13. Oh, okay.
Yeah. That's what the empirical research shows. And if we look at Shastra and we look at Vedic society, people were definitely engaged according to their nature by the time they were 13. Mm-hmm. Now, in many cases, I mean, just my kind of anecdotal experience having taught hundreds of kids is that in many cases, when kids are 2, 3, 4, 5 years old, you can see what their nature is. Not absolutely,
yes.
But in many cases,
sure,
you can tell. It's a question of knowing what to look like, what to look for.
Right.
So that people don't know what their nature is a gross fault of modern society.
It's just a gross fault.
It's a gross fault. It's violence. Mm-hmm. It's actually a form of violence that's being perpetrated on our young people. Mm-hmm. That they don't know there is such a thing as inherent nature that Krishna says can't be repressed. And there's no one to help them ascertain what that is or train them in it.
Right.
And so people are just lost.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, a lot of people, I've known so many people who they go into a certain career and then down the line they figured like this is not fulfilling me or this, and then they just completely change. Like someone who was a dentist then becomes a lawyer and goes through all the education that they need to qualify.
We
in a certain
talk about that
way.
in the book, yeah.
You talk about like how someone may go through that.
Yes, oh yes.
If you can elaborate on that, it'd be
just that it's so important to be in your right place.
Yeah.
That if you figured out you're in your wrong place, you need to change.
Yes.
Like I tell people, if you're already 70, forget it. Like
right.
just, it's done.
Yeah.
But other than that, if you're not in the right place, you need to change for your own spiritual health. When you're in the right place, you're going to feel enlivened. You're going to be in a state of flow. Mm-hmm. You're going to regretfully take time to eat and sleep.
Wow.
When you're in the wrong place, you're depleted. You're watching the clock. You're procrastinating.
Looking forward to Friday.
Yeah, you're just like, when can I?
So many people go through that, though.
I know. When you're in the right place, your mind is your friend. Your body and mind are in sync.
Yes.
And it's very, very easy to think about Krishna in your work when you're in the right place. When you're in the wrong place, your mind is your enemy.
Yes.
When you're in the right place, you can easily be detached from the fruits of your work. Because the work is an expression of yourself. You're getting intrinsic satisfaction. And you can easily give the fruits to Krishna. When you're in the wrong place, you're not getting that intrinsic satisfaction. So then you're very attached to the money or the prestige or the this or the that, and you get very attached to the fruits of your work. Plus, you're creating a dharma in the society if you're doing the wrong work. So you need to change. Now, for some people, changing is a small deal. Maybe the skills that they have in their present work can be transferred over to work in their proper field. Maybe they, like in something, we give the example in medicine, there's work in medicine in each of the 4 fields. So if you have medical training, but you're using your medical training in the field of resources and you realize you're actually in the field of government, you can probably use a lot of your medical training to get a job that's in the field of government.
That's hope-giving for sure.
Yeah, and a lot of cases is like that.
Oh, okay.
Or, and if you have to make an extreme change, for some people it's going to be easier than they thought. For some people it is going to be as hard as they thought, but it's worth doing. And we suggest doing it incrementally, and we suggest, if at all possible, doing it simultaneously. So you keep your present source of income so you don't end up homeless,
Yeah.
And then, and it's hard. I'm not saying it's easy,
Yeah.
but it's worth it. And then simultaneously you work on getting the trade, and that might take years to really be able to make that switch, especially if you have people depending on you. And we give examples. We give example of one woman working for a PhD, and she had just gotten some huge grant. She was studying primates, I think. But she kept falling asleep. Like while she was doing her, she'd just fall asleep all the time at random times. And eventually she decided, my body's trying to tell me something. She quit, became a chef.
Really?
Yeah. And she loves it. This is what I love to do.
Oh my gosh.
So ideally, we help people when they're young.
Yes.
And so we don't run into this kind of problem.
Yeah.
Because so many of the people that I do a consultation for are people in their 30s, 40s, or 50s who are like, I'm in the wrong place.
Because of this, you do you're known to do consultations regarding this.
Yes. Now, only if people have either attended my classes on it or read at least part 1 of the book.
Okay.
And I'm not going to do a consultation where I've got to teach the book to somebody.
Yes.
That's not fair.
Yes.
But if they've read at least part 1 of the book and or attended my seminars on Career Dharma and they're still confused, most people are not, but if there's some people who are still confused, then I'll do individual consultations, yeah.
That's so cool.
Now, sometimes that's literally a 2-minute thing. The longest it's ever taken is 2.5 hours.
Why did it take that long? Because you're trying
Well,
to get...
it took that long because it was a person in their late 40s who had done work in 3 different fields.
Oh.
And had had developed skills and expertise in those 3 fields. You know how Krishna says, even if you can do someone else's work perfectly?
Perfectly, yeah.
So they could do 3 different fields perfectly, externally.
Wow.
And they had interest in all 3. And so, I have like this kind of a flow chart of questions that I can ask people so that they can then introspect and reach there and then say, oh, the person has to understand it themselves. Mm-hmm. My doing coaching and facilitating is really just to help the person to understand it. I mean, sometimes I'll say, hey, did you just hear what you just said? Sometimes it's you look at the person and they'll talk about something and they light up. Mm-hmm. And they're talking about something else and they're like this. Mm. Okay, well, I'm doing this work and I'm this work. And then I do this work and I do this work.
Right.
Sometimes it's that obvious, but not to them.
All right.
And I'm looking at them, I'm like, hey, you just went from looking like, 9 o'clock at night to looking like 11 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
Anyway, with this one devotee, I went through all my normal stuff and we still didn't get anywhere. We were stuck between 2 fields. And then all of a sudden, kind of super soul just, hey, ask this question. So I asked that question, then it was clear. So then I added that question to my repertoire. But that was a 2.5 hour thing.
Wow.
But generally we're looking at 15 to 30 minutes, generally. But I have had 2 minutes.
Could it be that someone is working in their ideal field of work, but then when they and they go through this exercise, will it meet them at that specific place where they are feeling happy? And
I think if I understand your question, there are people who go through this and say, wow, now I really know I'm doing the right thing. Is
that's
that
what I'm asking. Yeah.
Yes. So I just, many people have said that, but I'm thinking one who's a police officer, detective, I think, who works with like severe violent crimes. Uh-huh. And he took the seminars and he said, what my takeaway from this, he said, is I am definitely, absolutely doing the right work for myself. And I'm even doing it the right way. He said, this is just a validation of everything that I'm doing.
Very cool.
And then I also have people who say, wow, I'm doing the right work and now I see how to do it spiritually.
Yes.
So I have people who even in the beginning say, I know I'm doing the right, I know this is me, but I don't know how to do it for Krishna. I don't know how to do it spiritually.
Right.
So, we got that whole kind of range.
Yeah. That's great.
Of people. So people who are doing the right thing in the right way and just, okay, now I understand why I'm so happy and why I'm so nicely situated, which means I can then help others. Mm-hmm. Or now I know how to do the right thing in the right way, or my goodness, I've really got to make a change here. Yeah.
Does it talk about like mothers who like mothering could be their career?
Well, in chapter 29, we talk about the stages of life.
Okay.
Student life, married life, retired life, and renounced life. So we only talk about that in chapter 29 and in relationship to career. So if you're going to talk about somebody for whom housework is a career, you'd have to talk about then someone whose nature is in the field of artistry and whose nature in the field of artistry would be to be a domestic worker. Like somebody who loves, like I have one devotee friend who cleans other people's houses for a living. And she loves doing that. So, or someone who'd be a nanny for a living, let's say, or a cook for a living. So if what you want to do for a living is clean houses and cook and take care of children, that's what you would do to be paid for, and that's what you're doing there in a family life, then there's a connection between being a wife, mother, and homemaker, and it is your career, except you're doing it for your family. You're not getting paid for it.
Yes.
For the vast majority of females, that's not the case. So you have some females for whom their natural career would be to be like a domestic servant. But the Bhagavatam talks about women in all four of the fields, generally in relation to marriage, that you should marry someone who's in the same field of work. Now, when I brought this up to people, they'll bring up, well, one reason for this is psychology, because the psychology of each of the fields is different. Like when Prabhupada talks about the psychology of the field of government, he gives the example of a woman. He says that, the king comes back from battle and he comes to the gate of the palace. He knocks on the gate and the guards go to the queen and they say, your husband, the king, has come back from battle. He's at the gate. Should we let him in? And the queen says, is he victorious? No, Your Majesty. Is he injured? No, Your Majesty. Then he's an imposter. Don't let him in. Wow. And they send this message down to the king, and he goes out and goes back to the battle and wins the battle. And Prabhupada gives this as an example of the mentality or the temperament of people in the field of government. So not only do men have all four temperaments, but women have all four temperaments as well. And ideally, you marry someone of a similar temperament. Mm-hmm. Now, it's not just temperament, though, because Krishna talks about Chatur Varna Mayashristam Guna Karma. So I've asked people, all right, if you have an inclination, a temperament, and you cannot exhibit that in action, how are you going to feel? How would you feel? You have a temperament, you have a nature, but you can't use it or exhibit it in any way. How would you feel?
Dissatisfied?
Yeah, frustrated, wouldn't you?
Frustrated, yeah.
Right. So a loving God is not going to make half of human society perpetually frustrated.
Right. Yeah.
Isn't that what it is? It's not that you're going to have a temperament of a field, but you don't do any work in that field. So when the Shastra talks about a woman serving her husband, that wasn't just washing his toes. Mm-hmm. She assisted him in his work.
Yes.
So when you had a husband and wife of the same temperament married, she assisted him in his work. And when you had in olden days when people married very, very young, so the girl was trained in that work in her married life. So the boy was probably trained previously. The girl was probably trained to some extent previously. Like Prabhupada talked about how Devaki was trained also by her parents. And Prabhupada talks about ideal family life. Like he says, so the woman is spinning, the man is weaving, together they make a cloth and sell it. This is ideal family life. Mm-hmm. Or he said, I saw a family, the husband, wife, children, they're all making pots and selling it. This is ideal family life. If we read in the Mahabharata about Draupadi told Satyabhama, she said, I am the only one who knows the real income and expenditure of the treasury. Now, Yudhisthira is the emperor, okay? what kind of treasury are we talking about? She was effectively the secretary or the minister of the treasury.
Yeah.
And she says, and I manage the royal household, okay, not big deal, of 100,000 people. I'm like, you're the mayor of a small town.
Yeah.
So you could say that the woman was an assistant, but she was an assistant in that work. And the idea was service to the husband included the career. Now, this changed. I don't know how much time you want to go into this, but the Industrial Revolution really messed this up. So first it messed it up with textiles. Women who made their living with spinning and weaving and dyeing and embroidery.
Oh, yeah.
That all of a sudden went to the factory.
Right.
And you couldn't compete with the handwork. The factory had lower prices. And so women, in order to continue making their economic contribution in their field, had to work in factories. And pretty soon, almost everything got outsourced to factories and offices. This concept of working in a factory and office didn't exist 250 years ago. Mm-hmm. Chanika Pandey says a man is happy if he doesn't have to leave home to go to work. So it wasn't just women. If you ran a school in your home. Right?
Yeah.
You have the farm, it's right there.
Yeah.
Or your mom and pop shop, or your pottery shop, right? It was right there. And so both the husband and wife could work, and then you had extended family. So it wasn't that one woman had to do all the childcare, all the cooking, all the cleaning,
Yeah.
everything. She had her mother-in-law, she had her sisters-in-law, and then you had servants. If you've got your mother-in-law and your aunties and your sisters-in-law, and then maybe you have another sister-in-law live 2 houses away, and then you have servants come in. Having a servant come, take your dirty laundry, wash it, dry it, iron it, fold it, put it away, is not the same as taking your laundry, sorting it out, putting it in the washing machine, taking it out, putting it in the dryer, ironing it, folding it, and putting it away.
Yeah.
The machines don't really replace the servants. Mm-hmm. So in a more traditional society, women could have their career without sacrificing their family. They could have an average of 6 kids. They didn't have to choose between family and career.
Yeah.
Industrialization forced women to choose between family and career. It forced it. It moved the career out of the home. It drew people to the cities, separated the extended families, destroyed a lot of the servants' class with automation. And then before birth control and abortion, women were still having an average of 6 children.
Yeah.
And they were still marrying young. And so biologically, they didn't have a choice. They had to choose home over career. They just didn't have a choice. At least they were busy at home because they had to grind the grain by hand and they had to wash the clothes by hand. So they were very frustrated, but at least they weren't bored. Right? And then you come to the industrialization of the home. The washing machine and the dishwasher and the blender, and the pre-made spices. And then you only have 1.8 or 2.8 kids and compulsory education, which came from industrialization.
Yeah.
So now all of a sudden you had women both frustrated and bored. And then you had birth control and abortion. Okay, well, I don't need to have babies.
Yeah.
And then women decided, hey, you know what? We're going to choose career over family. And that was the feminist revolution, to choose career over family. And sometimes devotees think, well, let's go back to the 1950s, where women had family but no career. And I say, have you ever seen a waterfall? Right before a waterfall, the water right before a waterfall is often very calm looking. Mm-hmm. The 1950s were right before the waterfall. And they don't represent Vedic society. What we really should be going back to is like the 1700s. But nobody wants to go back to the 1700s in every respect. I don't know anybody who does. Well, yeah. Probably there's a few romantics. Let's go back to the 1700s. But most people aren't inclined that way. And we talk about how to structure society so that women can have their natural, biological, and psychological position. That both men and women can have ashram, varna, and bhakti. That you can have your family, your career, and your devotion, that you can have a holistic life. I mean, one benefit of Kali and the pandemic is working from home.
Yeah.
Being able to have careers from home. And try to live near your family. So you do have extended family, or try to live in a community, make a non-biological family.
Yeah.
Have that support system. Let us try to revive some of the glory and the dignity of the servant class. Find ways where we can go back to those principles of how to honor people in a holistic way without having to sacrifice something for that.
Where is that part?
Chapter 29.
29. Okay. That's very interesting.
Thank you.
Let's talk about this, and then we can we're getting close to the end here, but
okay. I should just briefly say with that book, which we haven't talked about at all, is part 3 of this book is not about individuals, it's about society.
Oh, okay.
How to form an ideal society. So there's a chapter on how there should be cooperation between the fields, how there should be competition within the fields, how the fields act as checks and balances of each other.
Okay.
What's the vision for an ideal society? So to see, like, if you and I and he and she and then everybody and them and everybody were to do this properly, how could that fit together? What would an ideal society look like?
Right. Yeah, that's important because it's not just about each person doing it, but how it fits in the larger scheme of things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. And then this book, Krishna Meditations, tell us a little bit about this.
Well, that book came about from going to a swimming pool with Kalangana in London.
Really?
Yeah.
The late Mother Kalangana.
The late Mother Kalangana, yeah.
Oh, wow.
She said, Urmila, would you like to go to the swimming pool with me, I said, sure. So we're in the pool, and as I was swimming, I was chanting. I was like, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. And all of a sudden, I'm like, water is very strong, but it's very soft. Just like Krishna. He's very strong, but there he is in Kamsa's wrestling arena, this delicate young boy.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, whoa. So I wrote a series of articles for Back to Godhead on earth, water, fire, air, space, and how the qualities of each could remind us of Krishna's qualities. How Krishna has pastimes related to earth, water, fire, air, space. So those were published each as separate articles. And then I had a lot of people, and I would teach it sometimes, I had a lot of people, something like with the Career Dharma book, coming up to me over the years, you've got to make this into a book. You've got to do a book. You've got to just do a book. You've got to just do a book. And then I met Kamalasita, wonderful, wonderful Vaishnavi. She's a disciple of Indra Swami. She's originally South African, but she's married to a German. She lives in Germany. Mm-hmm. And I asked her if she'd be willing to help me with this. So we then looked at, the book has 4 sections. One section is just taken from those Back to Godhead articles. The next section is from all the I am verses in the Bhagavad Gita, and that's what I'll be teaching, Krishna willing, this evening in Plainfield, New Jersey.
Oh, nice.
I am the light of the sun. I am the taste of water.
Right.
I am the ability in man. And for each of these, we have a meditation. How is Krishna the taste of water? How is he the ability in man? How is he the beginning, middle, and end of all things?
Wow.
And we have illustrations to go with these too, that Nadia Mani, the famous kirtaner, that she did. Actually, the reason she did this, she was starting to do those on her own from the Bhagavad Gita verses. And I saw it on Facebook, and I'm like, hey, would you like to illustrate the book? Mm-hmm. Then the 3rd section is from the Bhagavatam, the descriptions in the 2nd and 8th canto of the universal form. That the trees are the hairs on the Lord's body.
Rivers, the Lord's veins.
Yes, exactly. So like a meditation on that, on the trees being the Lord's hairs. So I tell people, just like sometimes a little bug is walking on your arm and you can feel it walking. So when we're walking among the trees, it's like we're walking on the body of God.
Wow. Beautiful.
And then the 4th section is from the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, from the Nectar Devotion, the 64 qualities of Krishna. So the first 3 sections, you're starting with the world and going from the things you hear, see, smell, touch, taste to Krishna. Mm-hmm. The last section, you're going from Krishna to the world. So Krishna he's fluent, he's a linguist, and you hear people who are bilingual or trilingual, and you remember, oh, Krishna knows all the languages. He even knows the languages of the birds. So the things you're connecting those qualities of Krishna to the world.
Wow.
Now, the purpose of this book is actually very similar to the purpose of Career Dharma. How to live life with a thrill at every moment. How to remember Krishna always.
Yeah.
But Krishna meditation is written really for devotees, although I've definitely sold a lot of books to like yoga people and stuff like that. But it's specifically relating to Krishna's pastimes in ways that the general public wouldn't know anything about.
Sure.
Is it's going to relate to Mother Yasoda or Balaram or something like that. And this book is meant to be just like Career Dharma is a serious study. Krishna Meditations, you just open it anywhere, read one of the little meditations or look at one of the illustrations and say, oh, today I'm going to meditate on this.
Yeah.
This is going to be the way I'm going to try to connect my life with Krishna. Krishna is the intelligence of the intelligent. Okay, so whenever I or anyone else says or does anything intelligent, I'm like, that's Krishna.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see these two as connected, like further integration of this in the sense of your career and your life, and this in the sense of like your everyday things that you're interacting with.
Yes.
I love that.
Yes.
That's so nice.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
If you'd like to get these books, where can people get these books?
Well, they're on Amazon.
They're on Amazon. Okay.
They're both on Amazon as paperback and ebook. Krishna Meditations is also on Amazon as hardback.
Okay.
And Golden Age Media in India sells Krishna Meditations.
I'll get all the links and I'll put them in the description of this video so you can get these books. Thank you so much for joining.
And then if you follow me around the world, you can buy them from me and I'll sign them.
Yes. She's all over the world. I'll put your how to get in contact with you, and I'm sure you have like dates of where you are in different places, right?
Yeah, we're trying to create a revolution.
Yeah.
We're trying to create a cultural revolution.
Yes. Thank you.
We're trying to correct the imbalances of the world.
Sure.
And
really
give people the
that.
techniques of spirit. This is also a technique of spiritual life. Here, let's
do one.
Yeah, let's do one. Let's see. What are we going to do? Okay, so this is from the Bhagavatam. On the Lord's chest are all the clusters of stars. And this is we have an illustration for this.
Wow.
Srimati Radharani is the Ganges in which the elephant of my mind enjoys pastimes. She is the shining of the full autumn moon for the chakora bird of my eyes. She is the dazzling ornament, the bright and beautiful arrangement of stars on the border of the sky of my chest. Now today I have gained Srimati Radharani because of the highly elevated state of my mind. This is from Chaitanya Charitamrita, Ancha 191. Imagine if you could meditate on that when you see the stars. Just as the goddess of fortune is on the chest of the Lord in the Srivatsa curl of hair, whose supreme form also resides there as an arrangement of stars. Sometimes it is also said that the Lord puts a pearl necklace on the chest of his beloved, and that necklace looks like a cluster of stars. Our night sky with its glittering jewel-like stars is the Lord's chest decorated with his beloved.
Wow. Very nice. Thank you so much for coming and talking with us about this.
Oh, thank you for having me here.
Yeah.